Hello everyone, I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, I'm here to help you unwind, slow down, and let your thoughts drift gently into sleep. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and I'm honored to be part of that quiet moment in your evening. So before we begin, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Now, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Nurse Who Almost Took Me. When I was around the age of 12 or 13, my father sat us down and told us something that sent a chill down my spine. It was a story none of us had heard before, a memory from when I was a newborn, something that, according to him, nearly changed my life forever. He said it was a story about my kidnapping, a kidnapping that almost succeeded. I listened, unsure of what to expect, but the seriousness in his tone told me that this wasn't just another one of his tales. It all began in the hospital, just hours after I was born. My parents were filled with joy, overwhelmed by the love and pride of finally holding me in their arms for the very first time. The happiness was radiant, almost tangible, as if nothing in the world could go wrong. But that feeling didn't last long. After the birth, the doctor told my parents that I needed to be taken somewhere for routine observation. It sounded harmless enough at first. A nurse was called to take me from the delivery room. She was calm, composed, and wore the standard hospital uniform, complete with an ID badge. She seemed professional. She seemed trustworthy. But as my father recounted, there was something in her eyes, something subtle, something strange, that he noticed almost immediately. The nurse took me from the room, and she walked further than she should have. My dad said that something felt off from the moment she left. A few minutes passed, and then more. My mother began asking questions, and the doctor assured her that everything was fine, but my father wasn't convinced. A growing unease began to settle in his chest, a kind of intuition that only sharpened with each passing second. He decided to follow her, not right away, but far enough behind that he wouldn't raise suspicion. The hospital had multiple floors, and as the nurse made her way toward the first floor with me in her arms, my dad quietly trailed her. What he saw then, he would never forget. She wasn't heading to the observation area. She wasn't even close. She was moving toward the exit, calmly, methodically, like it was the most natural thing in the world. My father's heart dropped. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The nurse, the one trusted with my life, was moments away from walking out of the hospital with me in her arms. When the electronic doors slid open, she stepped forward. That's when my father's voice thundered through the corridor, sharp and full of fire. "Hey! Where are you going with my baby?" The nurse stopped. In that instant, the calm mask she wore shattered. She was stunned, caught completely off guard. Her eyes widened, her face went pale, and she did something strange. She handed me back, almost like she was startled out of a trance. "Oh, I'm sorry, here you go," she said, her voice trembling. Then, like a ghost, she turned and disappeared down the corridor. My father never saw her again. No one did. It was like she vanished into thin air. To this day, the hospital has no official record of that nurse. No name, no ID, no assignment logs, nothing. My dad always said it was as if she had never existed. The hospital didn't want to admit any fault. They dismissed it as a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, perhaps a nurse from another floor, but we knew better. My dad had looked into her eyes. He had seen something unexplainable in that moment. Over the years, I've thought about that story more times than I can count. I've come up with theories of my own. My first theory: maybe she was someone who had lost a baby, someone whose own grief had driven her to the edge, and in her grief-stricken mind she decided to take someone else's child to fill the void. Or maybe she couldn't have children at all. Maybe her longing became so intense that she simply broke, mentally and emotionally, and I was the child she chose. There's also another possibility, one that's less about tragedy and more about something else, something darker, something that doesn't make sense on a rational level. What if she wasn't a nurse at all? What if she had planned this? What if this wasn't a one-time thing? My dad always believed she didn't act alone, that somewhere someone had intended to take me, sell me, hide me, raise me, replace me. Whatever the reason, I was lucky, incredibly lucky. If my father hadn't followed her, hadn't spoken up, hadn't confronted her right then and there, I may not have been here to hear that story myself. I might have grown up in a completely different place, unaware of who I truly was. I sometimes imagine what my life could have been, a different name, a different home, a different reality. Would I have ever known who I really was? Would I have ever been reunited with my family? Or would I have vanished into the cracks of some unspeakable story, the kind that never gets told? My father isn't the emotional type, but when he tells this story, I see something heavy in his expression. An anger, yes, but also a fear. A father's fear. The kind that never really fades. That moment changed him. It made him more protective, more intense. He didn't let me out of his sight much after that, not when I was young. He never said it, but I knew. Our family has always been close, but after that incident we became unshakable. My parents didn't take risks. They didn't play games. My dad, especially, had a look in his eyes whenever strangers got too close. He had the kind of quiet vigilance you only find in someone who's already stared down the unthinkable. And maybe that's the scariest part of this story. Because monsters don't always live under the bed. Sometimes they wear scrubs, sometimes they walk through hallways, sometimes they carry clipboards and wear name tags and smile at new parents, and sometimes they walk right out the door with a child who never sees their real family again. But not this time. Not me. My father was there, he was watching, and that made all the difference. Story 2, The Girl Who Smiled in Her Sleep. When you're young, the line between dream and reality can blur without warning. Everything feels just a little too vivid, a little too close. I remember being 13 or maybe 14, that in-between age when you're still soft inside but trying to carry yourself like you're brave. It was around then that I had an experience that never quite left me, a strange and quiet moment during a sleepover that felt like something from another world. My best friend at the time, let's call her Emily, was obsessed with horror movies. Not just interested, obsessed. She could spend hours glued to the screen watching slasher flicks, possession films, and anything creepy or grotesque. I, on the other hand, wasn't quite as fearless. I'd always agree to watch with her, sure, but I'd usually be the one hiding behind a pillow, peeking through my fingers, or asking when it would be over. We'd made a bit of a tradition out of it. Friday nights, popcorn, dim lights, and at least one horror movie, often followed by nervous giggles and hushed talk long after the credits rolled. That particular night, we watched Mirrors, or rather, she watched it. I barely got through half of it before I was ducking under cushions and pleading with her to skip to something lighter. I never liked the idea of mirrors being portals, or reflections being somehow wrong, not quite lined up with the world we knew. She thought it was hilarious, of course, but agreed to turn it off once the movie ended and we got ready for bed. Emily lived in a small apartment with her mother, and her room had those sliding mirrored closet doors that covered half the wall. They shimmered faintly in the light from the street lamp outside, casting a dull silver hue over the entire room. She didn't have curtains or blinds, just a window that let in the glow of passing cars and distant headlights. Her bed wasn't huge, larger than a single but not quite a double, and when we slept in it together we always ended up pressed close for space. I asked if I could take the side closest to the wall, and she rolled her eyes in mock annoyance but agreed. It wasn't unusual. I was still a little rattled from the movie and the mirrors certainly weren't helping. The bed creaked as we settled in, the air thick with the warmth of summer, and I pulled the blanket up tight, cocooning myself against the outside world. I must have fallen asleep quickly because I don't remember much of the time between closing my eyes and waking again. It was still dark outside when I stirred, the glow from the window only slightly dimmed. At first, I didn't know why I had woken up. There was no noise, no strange jolt, just that slow, strange awareness creeping into my limbs. I was still facing the wall, half asleep, my hand resting loosely beside my face. That's when I felt it. A light tapping, soft and rhythmic, just under my palm. Tap, tap, tap. My breath caught. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was Emily. Maybe she was just fidgeting in her sleep, or trying to get my attention for some silly midnight joke. I forced myself to open my eyes and turn slightly, just enough to glance behind me without fully sitting up. Emily was lying beside me, her face inches from mine, her eyes were wide open, and she was smiling. Not a playful smile, not a sleepy grin. It was fixed, cold and distant. Her fingers were the ones tapping my wrist, tapping in that same eerie, rhythmic pattern. But she wasn't blinking. She wasn't speaking. She wasn't awake. Somehow I knew it instinctively. I can't explain how, but in that moment, I understood. She was still asleep, completely unconscious. Yet her eyes were open, and she was smiling at me in the dark. Slowly, the tapping stopped, but the smile remained. Without a word, she lifted her hand and waved. I froze. I wanted to scream, to wake her, to push her away, but my body wouldn't move. It was as though something invisible had slipped into the room with us, something watching, something enjoying the scene. I could feel its presence behind the mirrors, behind the walls, hiding in the shadows. Not knowing what else to do, I turned away from her, pulling the blanket up to my chin and pressing myself against the wall. I didn't want to see her anymore. I didn't want to know if she was still watching. I stayed that way for what felt like hours, my eyes wide open, waiting for the sun to rise. When morning finally came, the world returned to its normal rhythm. The air smelled like cereal and sleep, and Emily stretched and yawned beside me like nothing had happened. I asked her about it, half expecting her to laugh or call me crazy. And at first, that's exactly what she did. "You're such a chicken," she giggled. "Still scared from the movie, huh?" But I was insistent. I told her every detail, how she had tapped on my wrist, how she had smiled, how her eyes were open but lifeless. Her laughter faded, her face shifted, and then she told me something that made the hairs on my neck rise all over again. After I left that weekend, she went back to her normal routine. Her parents were home, everything was fine. But that Saturday night, just one day after I'd left, something strange happened. Around midnight, her parents were woken by a noise, a tapping noise. When they got up to check, they found Emily standing outside their bedroom window, barefoot, gently knocking against the glass with her fingers. Her eyes were open, she was smiling, and she didn't say a word. They tried to talk to her. She didn't respond. Eventually, her father gently guided her back to bed. She didn't resist, but her smile never faded and her eyes never blinked. She had no memory of it the next morning. After that night, it never happened again, at least not that I know of. She never sleepwalked before and, to my knowledge, never did after. But the image stuck with me, the way she looked, the way she moved, the silence of it all. That kind of moment carves itself into your mind like a scar. You carry it with you. I sometimes wonder if it was just a case of sleepwalking. Maybe her body was caught between worlds, one foot in dreaming, one foot in waking. Or maybe something came through that night. Something from the other side of the mirror. Something that found its way into her dreams and tried to speak through her. Whatever it was, it left a mark on both of us. I've never looked at sleep the same way since, and to this day, I can't sleep in a room with mirrored closet doors. Because sometimes, when the world is quiet and the lights go out, you wonder what's watching from the other side. And sometimes, just sometimes, it watches you, with your best friend's smile. Story 3, The Jacket in the Closet. Some stories come quietly. They don't start with a scream. They don't begin in the dead of night or in the woods where the shadows stretch long. Sometimes, the most terrifying moments begin with something completely ordinary, like wet shoes and a forgotten heating room. It was just after 9 p.m. on a weeknight. I remember it so clearly because I was focused on getting ready for school the next day. My mum and I were the only ones home. Just the two of us and our little dog in a cozy bungalow nestled in a tightly packed neighborhood. It was a safe area, the kind of place where neighbors waved across fences, where children played outside until dusk, and where the worst thing that usually happened was a stolen bike or the occasional loud party. It wasn't the kind of place you worried about strange things. That night, I remembered that my school shoes were soaking wet from earlier. Our school had a strict uniform policy, polished shoes, no exceptions, and I knew that if they didn't dry overnight, I'd be in trouble. Usually, we'd toss wet shoes into the airing cupboard in the bathroom. It had a large insulated heater that never failed to work its magic. But there was just one problem. My mum was taking a long, relaxing bath, and I didn't want to disturb her. So instead, I made my way to the second option, the heating closet at the far end of the house. It was tucked away in a corner we rarely used, more of a utility space than a proper room. It always felt a little colder there, a little quieter. But I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just where the older heater was stored and where the air dried things slowly but surely. As I walked down the hallway, the dog remained behind me. She always followed me around, but not this time. She stood frozen, ears perked, eyes fixed toward the direction I was heading. I paused for a second. I remember feeling an odd chill then, but again I brushed it off. It was an old house. Creaks, drafts, and strange noises were part of the background music. When I reached the heating closet, I noticed something strange. The small, waist-high window next to the closet door was open. That window was rarely ever used. In fact, I couldn't remember the last time I had seen it open. The breeze was faint, cool but not cold. It made the curtains sway just slightly. Still, I figured maybe Mum had opened it earlier to let out some steam or freshen the air. I opened the door to the heating closet. That's when I saw it. A jacket. It was a large, heavy leather jacket, black and bulky, facing away from me as if someone had hung it up hastily with the back toward the door. At first, I didn't really think about it. I assumed it belonged to Mum or maybe an old visitor. It seemed oddly positioned, but I shrugged and tossed my shoes into the room, closing the door behind me without a second glance. It was such a small thing, just a jacket, but sometimes we overlook the details that matter most. An hour passed. My mum was out of the bath, the dog was curled up in her lap, and I was watching TV in the lounge. Everything felt normal again. Until the sirens. It started softly, a distant wail in the distance, growing louder, sharper, more urgent. I muted the television, unsure whether I was hearing things. But then I saw the flashing lights out the window. Blue and red. 2 police cars, pulling up across the street. I stood up, walked to the front door and opened it slowly. That's when it all became a blur. The officers shouting. The speed at which they ran, not toward the house across the street, but toward mine. 3 of them, fast, serious, their hands reaching for their weapons. I stepped back instinctively, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then came the moment I'll never forget. One of the officers shouted toward the hallway, the same direction I'd walked earlier that night. "Over here! Get down, now!" The other 2 bolted forward. My mum appeared behind me, confused, clutching the dog to her chest. We followed carefully, hearts pounding, watching as the officers yanked open the door to the heating closet. Out came a man, a grown man in his 30s, wearing that same black leather jacket I had seen earlier. He stumbled as they dragged him out, the harsh metal of handcuffs snapping around his wrists. In his hand, a kitchen knife, a long, glinting blade that caught the hallway light like a warning. I could barely process what I was seeing. He had been in our house the whole time. The police asked questions. Where had I been? What had I seen? Had I noticed anything out of place? I told them about the jacket, about the window, about how I'd thought nothing of it, and each time I spoke my chest felt tighter, because with every word, I realized just how close I had been, just how easy it would have been for things to end differently. He had entered through that small open window, a quiet break-in, a silent entrance, and he had hidden in the heating closet, behind the jacket, waiting for someone to come close, waiting for a moment, maybe, to do something that none of us were prepared for. They later told us that he was mentally unwell, that he lived only a few streets away, that he had been looking for someone named Blake Thomas, a name we had never heard before, a name that meant nothing to us, and yet it almost cost us everything. That night, after the police left, the house felt colder than usual, the shadows longer, the silence heavier. I lay in bed and tried to sleep, but all I could think about was that jacket, that moment when I opened the door and saw it, that breath between awareness and ignorance. That moment where I had stood just feet away from a man holding a knife, thinking it was just a jacket on a hook. I kept asking myself, what if I had said something? What if I had stepped closer to inspect it? What if I had reached out to move it? Would he have lunged? Would I have screamed? Would he have... No. I don't like to follow that train of thought too far. It doesn't end well. In the days that followed, Mum changed every lock in the house. She sealed the window shut permanently. The heating closet was emptied out, and everything inside was donated, cleared, or burned. That room never felt the same. We started sleeping with the dog in our room. The hallway light stayed on even after we'd gone to bed. And Mum, she never took long baths again. Not while we were home alone, not after that night. People talk about close calls all the time, about car accidents they narrowly avoided or strange encounters that left them shaken. But nothing changes you quite like the realization that danger can be hiding in the smallest, most familiar places. That something as simple as an open window and a jacket in the dark can hold more horror than anything in a movie. The man didn't say a word when they took him away. He just looked at us, as if he didn't understand why he couldn't stay, as if he believed he belonged there. That still sends shivers down my spine. I've never seen him again. I don't know what became of him, or whether he ever remembered our names or our faces, but I remember his. I remember the stillness of that closet, the sound of the door opening, the silence that followed. I remember what it feels like to almost step into the arms of something you didn't know was there. And now, every time I open a door I haven't opened in a while, I pause. Just for a second, just long enough to listen. Because I've learned that sometimes the scariest things don't come with screams or shadows. Sometimes they just wait. Story 4. The Ball in the Woods. The summer of 2010 was one of those slow, dreamy stretches of time that seems to hang in the air long after it's passed. I was young then, still caught in the fragile space between childhood and the edge of adolescence, when your world is as wide as your neighborhood and danger feels like something you only see on television. We lived in the UK, in a small community where everyone seemed to know each other. That summer, every evening was spent outside, barefoot on the grass, surrounded by friends and laughter. It was around 8 p.m. when we all met up that day, a bunch of us kicking around a football on a familiar patch of grass just beyond the residential area. The sun was still hanging low in the sky, casting that golden hue that makes everything look softer. We played like we always did, shouting, running, laughing. It was one of those moments that felt too normal to ever be memorable. But it would be. The trouble began when Leo, always the one to kick too hard, launched the football over a small metal gate. Behind it was a stairway that led down into what we all called the woods, though really it was just a thick, shadowy stretch of trees wrapped around a neglected park pathway. The ball disappeared from view, swallowed by the foliage, and we paused our game with a collective groan. It shouldn't have been a big deal. We'd lost the ball back there before. Usually someone would hop the gate, grab it and return before the rest of us had time to argue over who was next to play. But this time something felt different. I can't quite describe it, just a twinge in my chest, a tightening in my stomach. Something told me not to go. Still, when the group decided to retrieve the ball together, I followed. That's what you do when you're young and trying not to look scared. You go where your friends go. You ignore your instincts even when they whisper warnings too quiet to fully understand. We climbed over the gate and made our way down the concrete stairs into the woods. It was already darker beneath the canopy, even though the sun hadn't yet set. The branches overhead tangled together like fingers, filtering the light into narrow streaks. We split up, calling out for the ball, searching through bushes and leaves, kicking aside bits of trash and broken branches. I wandered a little further than the others, my eyes scanning the underbrush, when I heard it. Soft crunching. Not quite footsteps. Not quite animal movement either. Something uneven. Like a limp. Like someone dragging one foot behind the other. The sound was subtle at first, just part of the natural woodland noise, but then it came closer. I froze, my heart suddenly loud in my ears. "Leo?" I called. "Jake? Charlotte?" I wanted it to be one of them. I needed it to be. But their voices answered from a different direction, distant and urgent. "Gabby! Gabby, get out of there! There's someone! Run!" I couldn't see them, but I could hear the panic in their voices. That's when I knew. The sound I'd heard wasn't them, and it wasn't a deer or a fox or anything that belonged in a place like this. I crouched low, scrambling backward toward the base of a tree, trying to blend into the shadows. That's when I saw him. He stepped into view from between two trees, a man, maybe in his 30s, wearing a black hoodie and black leather gloves. His movements were strange, almost puppet-like. His legs wobbled with each step, a stiff, waddling motion like a penguin, and in one hand he held Jake's football, in the other, a knife. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I just stared. He looked around slowly, scanning the underbrush like he was searching for something he knew was close. Then, his voice, quiet and sing-song, cut through the stillness. "I know you're here, girl. I saw you looking for this." He lifted the ball slightly, showing it off like a prize. Then, without warning, he raised the knife and plunged it into the ball. The rubber let out a high-pitched squeal as it deflated. His eyes, cold and gleaming, locked onto mine. And then, he smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile you see in everyday life. It was something deeper, something that didn't belong in a human face, something too wide, too pleased, too wrong. I screamed. Loud, desperate. It was the only thing I could do. The man laughed and hurled the deflated ball straight at me. It hit my chest, knocking me backward off balance. My legs dangled over the edge of the slope, and I clung to the branch above me, heart thundering in my chest. But then he was there, swinging the knife, and the blade caught my foot, just enough to slice through the fabric of my slip-on shoe and into the skin. The pain was sharp and immediate, but panic overpowered it. I slipped. I fell. The earth rushed up to meet me, and for a second everything was a blur. Then it all went black. I don't know how long I was out. Minutes maybe less. But when I woke up, I couldn't move. My wrists were bound tightly with duct tape. Something was covering my mouth, a gag thick and rough, and my head was enclosed in something dark. A bag. The world was muffled and distant. My thoughts were slow and heavy with fear. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Then, more noise. A scuffle, yelling, the sound of someone running. And then, hands on my arms. The bag was ripped away from my head, and the first face I saw was Luke's, Jake's older brother. His expression was wild, a mix of terror and fury. He said something, my name, I think, and cut the tape from my wrists. I sobbed with relief. I looked past him toward the trees and saw the man, just for a second, standing between the branches, watching. His smile was gone now, replaced by something colder. And then he vanished. We told the police everything. Descriptions, directions, details, but they never found him. never even identified him. He had vanished like smoke, leaving behind nothing but fear and a scar on my foot that I still carry to this day. We moved houses the following week. My parents didn't want to wait. They didn't want to risk it. I didn't argue. I didn't sleep for days. I sometimes think about that moment, the moment I first saw him in the woods. If I'd listened to that feeling in my gut, if I'd just stayed behind the gate. But I didn't. I went along with the group. I ignored the whisper inside me, and it nearly cost me everything. Now, every time I hear the crunch of grass underfoot or the rustle of leaves, my breath catches. Every time I see a black hoodie or leather gloves, something inside me tenses. I've learned that danger doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it holds a football and pretends to play. But most importantly, I've learned to trust that quiet voice in the back of my mind, the one that whispers, "Turn around, go back. Something's not right." Because the woods are never just woods, and sometimes you're not alone. Story 5. The Stranger Behind the Cabin Door. The wilderness has a way of wrapping around you. Out there, far from the city's noise, everything slows down. It becomes quieter, simpler. At least, that's what it always felt like when we went to my grandfather's cabin. Tucked away in the backwoods, nearly 30 miles from the nearest town, it sat along a beautiful river, framed by tall mountains and endless sky. We went there often in the summer, a family tradition, a kind of escape. It was a place of fishing, hiking, and long nights around the campfire. But one summer evening, what was supposed to be peaceful became something I'll never forget. That trip started like any other. We arrived near sunset, the sun casting golden light over the gravel road as we slowly approached the cabin. The way in was always the same. Down a winding forest path, then through a large yellow gate that marked the beginning of private land. I still remember the crunch of the tires on the gravel as we rolled to a stop. I hopped out to unlock the gate. But something was strange. The heavy padlock wasn't secured. It was just sitting there on top of the latch, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. Not open, not broken, just resting. I hesitated. We never left the gate unlocked, not ever. My dad joined me, inspecting it silently. He was usually forgetful with keys and details like that, so he waved it off, said he must have forgotten to lock it last summer. But there was something uneasy in his voice, something that didn't quite match his words. We drove the rest of the way in silence. As we reached the cabin, that unease grew. There were footprints in the dirt, lots of them. Not fresh, but not old either. Tracks leading around the entire property. Someone had been here. Someone had walked the perimeter, stopped near the windows, circled the shed. My father didn't speak. He just told us, my siblings and I, to stay back. He and his friend grabbed the shotgun and pistol from the truck and carefully approached the front door. It was locked. Windows unbroken. No sign of forced entry. Still, they circled the whole place, checking every corner. Nothing was missing, nothing was stolen, no signs of vandalism, just footprints. That was it. Eventually they gave the all clear. Whoever had been there was long gone. Or so they thought. We unpacked our things, tired from the drive, and walked down toward the river, where we'd left our luggage near the canoes. The breeze was cool against the heat, and the water shimmered under the late sun. I remembered the weight of my gear as I climbed back up the hill toward the kids' cabin. It wasn't far, but the incline was steep, at least a 25-degree angle, and the bags felt heavier than ever. My sisters and I were exhausted, our legs aching, our shirts sticking to our backs, but we made it. The kids' cabin was smaller, tucked just behind the main lodge. We unlocked the door, stepped inside, and collapsed onto our beds. The air inside was still, thick with the scent of cedar and old blankets. We didn't speak much, just lay there, catching our breath, enjoying the stillness. Then we heard Mum calling from the main lodge, "Supper's ready!" It had grown darker by then. The forest outside had changed from green to shadow. I was the last one out the door. My sisters were already several feet ahead, walking toward the main cabin. I turned to shut the door behind me, and that's when I saw it. Movement. In the woods, just beyond the trees. It was quick, subtle, barely a flicker in the corner of my eye, but it was there. A human shape, someone standing just behind the trees, half shrouded in darkness. I blinked, stared hard. Nothing. I caught up with my sisters, my voice steady, my face calm. But inside I was buzzing. Something wasn't right. I told my dad during dinner. He dismissed it, said it was probably a deer, maybe a moose, maybe even just a trick of the light. But I knew what I saw, and it wasn't a deer. Later that night, around 9:30 or 10 p.m., we headed back to the kids' cabin. The sky was fully dark now, the stars cold and clear overhead. The air felt heavier. Still. Too still. As we neared the cabin, I looked toward the same patch of woods, and there he was, a figure, behind a tree, watching us. I stopped in my tracks. My sisters asked what was wrong. I pointed, but by the time they looked, the figure was gone. They didn't believe me, said I was tired, said I was seeing things. But I wasn't. When we got inside, I checked the door. It didn't have a lock, not really, just an old handle that clicked shut but didn't secure tightly. That's when I remembered the little .22 rifle we kept under the bed, just in case of wildlife. I pulled it out, checked the ammo, and laid it beside me. The night was quiet. For a while, I stayed awake, or tried to, my eyes heavy, my ears tuned to every creak and whisper. Then I heard it. Footsteps, outside, slow, steady, deliberate. Someone walking around the cabin. I sat up. My sisters stirred. I woke them quietly, told them to listen. We held our breath, hearts racing. Another sound, a creak on the porch, then the doorknob. It turned, inch by inch, and the door began to open. I couldn't move. My hands trembled. The rifle felt heavy in my grip. The door creaked wider, and in the faint glow of moonlight, we saw him. A man. He stood in the doorway, dressed in all black. A mask covered his face, a hood over his head, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He didn't see us at first. The lights were off. We were shadows in the dark. But I was holding the rifle, and I wasn't going to let him hurt us. In the deepest voice I could manage, I shouted, "Who the hell are you?" My sister flicked on the light. The man froze. For a second, no one moved. Then I raised the rifle, shouted again, "Get out!" He bolted. We screamed for help. The adults came running. My dad, furious, shouting, grabbed his pistol and fired into the woods as the man disappeared into the trees. We didn't sleep that night. All of us, kids and adults, gathered in the main lodge, armed and alert. My dad and his friends searched the perimeter, guns drawn. I remember walking through the darkness, every shadow a threat, every tree a possible attacker. At one point I saw something move behind a pine, fired a shot, and hit nothing but bark. Eventually we gathered back inside. 2 adults stood watch while the rest of us tried to rest. No one spoke much. We all knew how close it had been. The next day we returned to town and called the police. They promised to look into it, but we knew better. The man was gone. Whoever he was, he knew these woods. He knew how to vanish. I still think about him sometimes. I think about the way he moved, the way he stood there, just watching us, the way he opened that door like he belonged there, like he was just walking into his own space. And I think about what would have happened if I hadn't grabbed the rifle, if I had been asleep, if I had frozen completely. Sometimes people ask why I didn't shoot. The truth, I was scared, terrified. I had the gun, I had the chance, but in that moment, my hands wouldn't listen, my heart was too loud, my breath too shallow. I just couldn't. But I did enough. And that night we were lucky. Story 6, A Knock in the Dark. There's something about the silence of a house at night that can either comfort or unsettle you, depending on what you've known. When you're young, that silence is often filled with imagination, shaped by the things you've seen on late-night television or the stories whispered on playgrounds. But for me, it became something else, something darker, after one quiet winter night when I was 14 and home alone. It was a typical evening, at least on the surface. My mum and stepdad both worked late, and it wasn't unusual for me to be the only one in the house until well past 10. I was used to it. Our home was nestled in a quiet suburb, where the houses stood close together and every lawn was trimmed neatly. It was the kind of place where people nodded politely, where streets were lit with soft orange lamps, and nothing bad ever really seemed to happen. That night it was cold and dark outside, one of those midwinter evenings where the sun slips away by 5 p.m. and by 7:30 the sky is pitch black. I was upstairs in my room, surrounded by textbooks, trying to cram for an upcoming school test. I had the heater humming beside me, a dim lamp casting a warm glow across my notes, and the rest of the house was still, quiet, peaceful. Then came the sound that started it all. The doorbell. I stopped writing, pen frozen mid-sentence. At first, I thought I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the creak of the house or the heater clicking. But then it rang again. And each press was slow and deliberate, not frantic, not casual, just consistent. And that was what made it unsettling. My mum had always been strict about answering the door at night. If you don't know who it is, don't open it, she would say. Don't even let them know you're home. So I followed her advice. I stayed quiet. I didn't move. I didn't peek through the window. I just waited. But the ringing didn't stop. It came again and again, faster now, almost like whoever was on the other side was growing impatient or angry. I couldn't see the front door from my bedroom. Our porch had a covering that blocked the view from most of the upper windows, and the only way to see who was there would have been to go downstairs and peek through the side window near the living room. But I couldn't bring myself to move. A strange feeling had begun to settle into my chest, a kind of dread that I hadn't felt before. It was quiet, creeping and cold, like something inside me had already recognized that something was wrong. The doorbell finally stopped, and for a moment there was silence again. I exhaled slowly, hoping that whoever it was had left. Then came the banging, loud, hard, fists pounding against the front door. Whoever was out there wasn't just ringing the bell now. They were trying to be let in. I remember holding my breath, listening so closely I could hear my own heartbeat. The knocks echoed through the house, sounding impossibly loud in the quiet. They weren't soft knocks. They weren't playful. They were heavy, demanding. Then they stopped, just as suddenly as they began. I didn't dare move. I just listened. A new sound followed, soft footsteps. They scraped against the gravel outside, circling the house. I realized then that the person hadn't left. They were moving. I crept toward my door and opened it just slightly, enough to hear better. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them walking through the front garden, their steps crunching across the frost-covered grass. Then the doorbell again, rapid this time, over and over, like someone holding their finger down in a frenzy. That's when I grabbed the cordless phone from my bedside table. My hands were shaking as I dialed. I tried to remember the number for the non-emergency police line, but I couldn't think clearly. So I dialed emergency. The operator answered calmly. Her voice was a lifeline. She asked me my name, my age, my address. And then she stayed on the line with me. As I explained what was happening, the noise outside escalated. The doorbell ringing gave way to more pounding, on the windows now, not just the front, but the sides of the house. Each hit made the glass rattle. The operator told me to stay on the line, to stay upstairs, to stay quiet. She said officers were already on their way. That was when I heard something that made my blood run cold. A dragging sound, something scraping against the brick. A long, slow scrape, like metal on stone. Then the rattling of the side gate, the one that led to the backyard. I whispered everything I was hearing to the operator, barely able to keep my voice steady. She remained calm, even though I could hear the tension in her voice. She told me to lock my bedroom door just in case. I did. The noises outside continued for what felt like hours, though it must have been minutes. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, phone pressed to my ear. The operator asked me simple questions to keep me grounded. What colour my bedroom was, how long I'd lived there, if I had pets, anything to keep me focused. Then came the knock, but this time it was soft. Just one. The operator paused. That might be the officers, she said. Let me confirm. I waited, heart hammering. She returned a moment later. They're there. 2 officers are at the door now. Relief washed over me so fast I almost cried. I crept downstairs and opened the door slowly. 2 uniformed officers stood outside, their faces serious but kind. Behind them, the flashing lights of the patrol car lit up the street. One of them looked at me and said, "You must be Andre." I nodded. "We found a man passed out by your front door," he said. "He's been taken into custody." I stepped outside just enough to see the man, handcuffed, sitting on the curb, his head down. Next to him was a bottle of vodka. And something else. And a packet of condoms. I felt my stomach turn. "He's been on the run for a while," the officer continued. "He's a known predator. We've been looking for him for years." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just stared at the man, the one who had tried to force his way into my home, the one who had waited, who had circled the house, who had rung the bell over and over again. He looked up, just for a moment. His eyes were glassy. But I'll never forget the way he smiled, a slow, slurred smile like none of this mattered to him. The officer placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "He won't be bothering anyone else for a long time," he said. "He's going away. You're safe now." I nodded again, but I didn't feel safe. Not really. That night, I didn't sleep. Even with both officers gone and the door double locked, I sat in bed wide awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound. Every creak, every whisper of wind felt like him. Every flicker of shadow made me flinch. I kept the phone beside me, just in case. It's been years now, and I still live in that same house. But I've never answered the door at night again. Not even once. And whenever the doorbell rings after dark, I freeze. Just for a moment. Because now I know sometimes the danger doesn't knock like a monster. Sometimes it rings the doorbell politely, over and over again. Story 7. The Man with the Axe and the Bucket. Sometimes the things that scare you the most are the ones you never expect. The sudden turns that pull a peaceful day into something darker. I was 13 then, old enough to think I understood the world, young enough to be wrong. The neighborhood we lived in wasn't the kind that you'd call dangerous. It had a park and a small patch of woods, and a quiet creek that trickled through the trees. It was the kind of place where summer felt long, and the hours slipped by without much urgency. My friends and I loved it, we felt safe there, but looking back now, I realize how quickly that illusion can fall apart. That afternoon, my friend and I decided to spend the day at the park. The sun was bright overhead and the air was filled with the quiet sounds of birdsong and the occasional distant laughter of kids playing nearby. We were tossing sticks into the creek, challenging each other to see whose would land farther downstream. It was nothing. Just one of those small games that fills up a summer day when you've got no responsibilities and all the time in the world. Then we heard it. Click, click. A sharp sound not far behind us. We paused, glanced over our shoulders and saw nothing. We laughed it off at first, probably just someone walking by. But then it came again. Click, click, this time louder, closer. I turned and scanned the area more carefully, and that's when I saw him. A man, older, maybe in his 50s or 60s, was standing just behind the edge of the tree line. He wore a grey t-shirt and jeans and he was holding something in his hands. At first, I couldn't tell what. Then, I saw the camera. It was pointing it at us, snapping photos. It took a few seconds to register the way he stood, the way he stared, the way his eyes didn't blink. It didn't feel right. He saw us looking and started yelling. "Get off my property," he shouted. "Get out of there." I looked at my friend, confused. "Are we on his land?" "No," my friend said. "His fence ends way back there. This is the park." But the man didn't stop. He kept yelling, his voice growing louder and more erratic. At first it was words. Then it was just noise, shouts and curses, full of rage. We started to back away, thinking maybe we should just leave, even though we weren't doing anything wrong. That's when he stepped closer, and we saw what else he was carrying. A bucket and an axe. My heart sank. "If you don't leave," he shouted, his voice breaking into a wild pitch, "I'll chop off your heads and put them in this bucket." He raised the bucket slightly, swinging it in the air like a threat, like a promise. We froze. It didn't feel real. The moment felt suspended in time, stretched so thin you could hear the silence pressing in around his voice. For a second, none of us moved. We just stood there, the sounds of the creek forgotten, the sunlight suddenly feeling too bright, too exposed. Then he started walking toward us, not running, just a steady, unhurried pace, like he knew we wouldn't get far. We bolted. We turned and ran as fast as our legs could carry us, our feet kicking up leaves and loose dirt, our lungs burning. We didn't know where we were running to, just away. Somewhere behind us, we could hear him crashing through the underbrush. And that sound, the metallic clink of the axe against the bucket, still rings in my memory. A horrible rhythm, metal against metal, step by step. We didn't scream at first. We were too focused on escaping. But when I looked over my shoulder and saw him still following, still grinning, I yelled for the others. I screamed their names, told them to run, to hide. My friend grabbed my arm and pulled me down into a thick cluster of shrubs. We hit the ground hard, tucked ourselves as tightly as we could, our breathing ragged and loud in the small space. The sunlight barely touched the ground through the trees, and in that moment it felt like we had slipped into another world. A place where time didn't work the same, where silence had weight and every second felt like it could be the last. We waited. The footsteps came closer. Then they stopped. The clinking sound returned, slowly, clink. Then his voice, soft now, singing almost. "Where are you?" he chimed. "Where do you go?" He stepped past our hiding spot once, then again. The leaves barely rustled under his feet, but we could hear him, feel him. He poked at the bushes once with the handle of the axe. We didn't breathe. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the sound faded. The footsteps moved away, the clinks grew softer. Then, nothing. We waited longer, minutes that felt like hours. Eventually we heard a car pull into the park's small lot. My friend's mother had arrived after we had called her mid-flight through the trees, and not long after, the police. We ran to them, we tried to explain, but by the time the officers arrived, the man was gone. They searched the area, asked us questions, promised to patrol the park more often, but no one ever saw him again. Not in our neighborhood anyway. For weeks afterward, I avoided the park. I avoided the woods. I avoided even walking past that part of the neighborhood. Every sound made me jump. Every creak in the house made me wonder if he had followed us. And then, one afternoon, I saw him. Not face to face, not up close, but from across the street. He was standing by a tree half hidden, watching. When I turned to get my mum, he was gone. We moved a few months later. Not just because of that, but it was part of the reason. I didn't argue. I didn't want to live near that park anymore, near those woods. Some nights I still hear it. The click of the camera, the clang of the bucket, the scrape of the axe against the metal rim. And I remember that smile, that grin that didn't belong to anyone sane. I don't know what he would have done if he caught us. I don't want to know. But I know what he said, I know what he promised, and I know how close he came to keeping it. Story 8. The thing that followed me from the house on 49th Street. It's strange how certain places never leave you, not because of fond memories or something sentimental, but because they leave a scar. Some houses feel different the moment you walk into them. Even as a kid, you notice things without understanding why. A shift in the air, a silence too deep, a cold spot that never warms. For me, that place was a modest, aging house on 49th Street. It was the home of my childhood best friend, Anna, and her older brother Nate, and it was haunted by something I still can't explain. The year was 1997. I was 6 years old, and my family had just moved to Lloydminster, Canada. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined, and simple. Within a few blocks I had made new friends, but none closer than Anna. She and Nate had moved into a house just 2 blocks away from mine, a place with a finished basement and a weird smell that always lingered in the air, something earthy, old, like wet concrete and dust. From the outside, it didn't look like anything special. It was just another house with a sloping yard, pale siding, and a crooked porch. But the first time I stepped inside, I felt it. Something in the pit of my stomach told me this house was different. I didn't know why. I was too young to understand those feelings. I just brushed it off and told myself I was being silly. Anna and Nate shared a room, with bunk beds pushed up against one wall. The walls were painted a dull cream, and they kept the lights low most of the time. Downstairs, the basement was finished, but no one liked going there. Not even the adults. It was always cold, even in the summer, and the shadows felt thick, like they had weight. Nothing strange happened at first. For the first few months we just played games, told jokes, and made plans for sleepovers. But the house had a way of creeping up on you, of revealing itself slowly. It started with one night, one moment, and from there, everything began to unravel. It was late, long after Anna and I had climbed into the top bunk and Nate had fallen asleep below. I was drifting off, comforted by the sound of Anna's steady breathing beside me. Then she shook me awake, hard. Her hand gripped my arm and her voice trembled. "Do you see that?" she whispered. I rubbed my eyes and followed her gaze toward the foot of the bed. At first, I didn't see anything. But then I did. A man, or something shaped like a man. He stood tall, motionless, his head nearly brushing the ceiling. The faint light from the street lamps outside crept in through the window, just enough to show that he had no face. No eyes, no mouth, just darkness where his features should have been. His body was black, not like clothing, but like a shadow given form. Anna and I clung to each other. I remember whispering to her, asking if she was awake. She nodded. We both were. It wasn't a dream. It couldn't be. We lay there frozen, watching the figure stare back at us. I don't know why I did it. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of desperation, but I grabbed a pillow and threw it. It passed straight through him, like he wasn't there at all. The moment it landed against the wall, he vanished, sinking down through the floor, like melting into the shadows. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning we tried to tell our parents, but they didn't believe us. They smiled gently, said we were probably dreaming, that it was our imagination. But we knew what we had seen. And that was only the beginning. From that night forward, the house seemed to change. It felt darker, heavier. Nate started drawing symbols on the wall, triangles and strange patterns that he said came to him when he closed his eyes. He became distant, irritable. One day he snapped. He tore through the room, screaming, throwing things, tearing toys apart. Anna and I tried to calm him down, but he said he couldn't stop. He collapsed on the floor crying. Their parents blamed stress, said he needed more sleep, but we knew something was wrong. Then Anna began sleepwalking. At first it was harmless. She would wake up in the hallway or standing in the kitchen. But soon it got worse. She'd walk with her eyes wide open, rolled back so far you could only see the whites. Her steps were slow, mechanical, like she wasn't fully in control. and she wouldn't respond when we called her name. One night, she walked into her parents' room, climbed onto the edge of the bed, and whispered, in a voice that wasn't hers. Just a single sentence. "He's still in the basement." Her parents were terrified, but they didn't know what to do. They didn't believe in hauntings or spirits. They thought it was stress, a phase. But to us, it was real. Then the drumming began. At night we would hear it, soft at first, like fingertips tapping the walls, then louder, always in rhythm, always just above our heads. And sometimes, when the lights were off, we would see shapes moving across the ceiling, lights that had no source, whispers in the corners, laughs that didn't belong to anyone we knew. The basement became off limits. Even the adults wouldn't go down there unless they had to. One night, their dad was walking back from the bathroom when he saw something standing at the end of the hallway. Not a man, not a shadow. Something in between. He yelled, thinking it was an intruder, but it slipped through the floor, just like the faceless man we had seen. After that, he stopped denying what was happening. They brought in workers the following spring to renovate the basement. When they tore open the walls, they found something that chilled all of us. Ouija boards, tarot cards, burned candles, pages with symbols we didn't recognize, hidden inside the dry wall, as if someone had been using the space for rituals, or worse. The police were called. No one could explain it. No one ever lived there before them, at least not according to records. But someone had, and they had left something behind. Anna's family moved out a few weeks later. The sleepwalking stopped, the nightmares ended, the noises were gone. But for me, it didn't stop. Even after I moved away, after my family relocated to another city, it followed me. Not every night, but some. I'd wake to the sound of breathing beside my bed, a pressure on my chest, a whisper in my ear. "Did you forget me?" I'd sit up, heart racing, only to find the room empty. But the feeling wouldn't leave. The air would still feel heavy, and I'd find bruises on my neck, finger-shaped marks that no one could explain. My parents grew worried. I fell into a depression, began harming myself. I didn't tell them why. I couldn't. It sounded insane. Eventually they got me help, therapy, medication. Slowly, the nightmares faded, the pressure lifted. I started to feel like myself again. But I never forgot, and I never stopped looking over my shoulder. Even now, years later, I still wake some nights and listen, just in case. Because the house on 49th Street wasn't just haunted, it was hungry, and I was the one it chose to follow.